All right, welcome to In Real Time. My name's Hunter. I'm your host, and today with me is Malcolm Reeve. Mal, how we doing?
Great.
So
It's a
you're
beautiful day.
over. Beautiful day. So Malcolm is in Australia. So tell us a little bit about what you do over there right now.
Yeah, so I grew up in Australia, married an American, lived in the States for 20 years, and then moved back here pretty much January 1st, 2017. And I am full time in camping ministry. So for the past 6 years, or the past 5 years, I ran one of the campsites that's in our group. We have five campsites. And just over a year ago, I got the privilege to step into the CEO role to lead all of them. So
That's awesome.
it's been a whirlwind six years now. Yeah.
That's wild. That's awesome.
Mm.
So we worked at Cran Hill together. You were my first ministry boss.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
yeah. Well, and I was thinking the other day as we were kind of hashing out the details. A lot of and I don't know if you know this or not, but a lot of my ministry philosophy comes from our 9 months or my 9 month internship under you. And I
Okay.
was telling someone just the other day that you're really the reason I got out of camping ministry. We
Could
were having
always
a
serve as a bad
conversation.
example. Yeah.
No, we were having a conversation early on in the internship, and you asked, "Well, why are you here? Essentially, why are you in? Why do you want to do camping ministry?" And no one had asked me that before, and I said, "Well, I really something to the effect of I really want to walk kids through the spiritual aha moments, or really like some of that camp does that." And really like walking kids through the camp experience. And I think your response was, "Well, I don't think camping ministry is for you." And I'm like, "What do you mean? That's
That
the
was a,
perfect answer."
was a nice piece of clarity, couched with no kindness at all.
Yeah, but it was great. And then you said, "Well, most of my time goes to creating the program and working with the college kids and the summer staff. It's less with the campers." And I didn't know what to do with that because I had just started working in camping ministry. But that was really important because that was the first really, oh, well, maybe youth ministry is the direction, not camping ministry.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but then
And now you
we
spend
would go
most of
on
your
to
time
have like,
pouring. You spend most of your time now pouring into your youth leaders and equipping them for ministry with kids.
yeah, exactly. Like, it was so funny. I did youth ministry for about a year before that same philosophy became, well, you don't, that same thing. You're pouring into your leaders. I'm not spending as much time with the kids as I thought I would.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Not, I mean, not
that
to
was a
go
really
all
cool dynamic.
super, stretch the analogy too far, but Jesus poured into 12 and they fed the 5,000. Wasn't did the work.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, that's it. That's discipleship.
yeah.
Word to equip. That's yeah. So no,
I
that
talk
was
about you.
really
I talk about you
uh,
sometimes as conversations come up at Cran Hill, and I refer to you as I don't know if we ever actually called you that to your face or not, but maybe we did. Um, I refer to, oh yeah, this Hunter. I used to always think of him as B Dubs because he could just wing it anytime, anywhere.
I don't think I ever heard that, but that was yeah. That I mean, that's what you got to do sometimes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Put him in front of people, he could wing it
We
really well.
made my. I don't like doing that as much. Preparation is one of my favorite things. Someone said once, "You can't. There's nothing wrong with leaning on the Spirit, but you also can't out prepare God." So it's a both and. I saw a video the other day in my Facebook memories, the shower of power.
The number of
I don't know
times
if you
I
remember
go
the.
through that as
Oh,
both an example of, well, it was the one time in my life I could remember that Pythagoras theorem, we actually used it. I was like, oh my gosh, we're about to use like a right angle triangle to figure something out. And also this whole fun part of building it. And then remember, we took it to the building and it didn't fit under the rafters. Like we couldn't move it. We could only move it like in XY direction, not in the other way. I was like, oh well.
We had like 8 feet to work with because of the stage. I've come to call that the H factor, the hunter factor. There's a part in every project that I don't think about until the very end, and more often than not, I have to go back and redo a big portion of whatever it is.
Yeah,
the H factor.
we got there in the end.
Fun.
It was a fantastic end result. Like it worked really well.
For what did we use it for? A combined 30 minutes that summer.
Yeah, over
or that winter. I mean,
it was probably like 2 times a weekend for 4 weekends, and it was like a minute each time. So,
yeah.
And then somebody said, "Oh, what'd you do with it?" And I went, I don't know. It probably got stuck in a shed or went to probably take it apart to get it out of the building.
We put so much time into that thing. That's all right, but that was fun. So it was like the cash cube thing where the air goes in and you're trying to, for the people who are like, what are they talking about? Shower of power. Yeah, just so. Yeah, but they so many little nuggets like that that I look at, that built the foundation coming into, and then the summer I was the program director. I mean, that was very practical. Like, okay, I just did this learn from this guy for a couple years, and he's not here anymore, so I don't get to ask him questions. It wasn't like you moved a couple states away, like you're way over there. So the other really the cool moment was after you left, we called you 6 months later. How quick your Australian accent came back.
I guarantee you that in the time that we talk, it'll wander back and forth between one and the other.
All right.
It's one of those things, and I would have done that from the very first time I went to the States when I was 20 or something. And I was like, one of those things you don't like about yourself, that all of a sudden I realize I'm talking to this person and I'm mimicking their accent, and so then this internal dialogue goes on. Do they notice that? Do they think I'm mocking them? Like, what's happening here? But I do notice. I get on Zoom, Facebook, whatever, and I can still pull out my my fake American accent a lot, or a pretty good fake Australian accent. The fun one is watching my daughter, who was born in Australia but left when she was 5 months old, grew up entirely in America, who now has a pretty good Australian accent after living back here for 2 years.
Yeah.
So, awesome. She lost.
So, what originally brought you to the States? Because you said you moved over here when you were 20.
Yeah, so that's the camp conversation. I took a year off I did a year of college and then put my studies on hold because I didn't like what I was doing. And you could kind of do that. They just save your place for you and pick it up again a year later, a bit like a gap year thing, but in college. And so I went to the US just for summer camp. I was going to be there for June, July, August, maybe travel a bit and come back home again. And so that was 3 months of, I'd been a camp leader in Australia a few times. It was kind of a voluntary role there. And so I came to do the summer staff work at camp for a summer thing that a few of my friends had done. And it was great. Little camp in Ohio that I talk about. So at that, long before the internet, this is way back when, Hunter. And so at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm just dead asleep, and my dad's like banging on my bedroom door. There's some guy on the phone for you. And so the camp director had got my file to come and work at his camp or whatever. And so he just, I'll give this guy a call. No concept of what the time difference. He's just ringing me. And so I'm having this interview on the phone. I'm just like, yeah, I do camp. Yeah, it's great. Finished up being there for a year, stayed there till November, met Laurie and my wife now, and spent lots of weekends driving to where she lived and lots of weeks working at camp. And it was a lot like Cran Hill. There was little bits to do throughout the week and lots of busy weekends. And then all of a sudden summer camp comes along. And so I did that for 2 years. I just bounced back and forth, avoiding winter in either country. Got to November in Ohio and I went, this is really freezing cold. I got to get out of here. And I went back home and did camp in Australia, kind of the same thing, summer camp for 3 months, saved up a bit of money, came back to the States again, and we got married at the end of that second year that I ran back and forth. And at that point, which we tell people a lot, we got married and we moved to Australia for good. And then I went back to college. Laurie was teaching. We had a baby. Like fast forward 5 years, and we moved back to the US for good. And that's gonna be it. And then and then it took a little bit longer, but 20 years later, we moved back to Australia for good. And this time really feels for good. Although we usually say they were all for good, like for our good, but it wasn't quite the for good that we were thinking. It was like, oh, okay, different plans happening now. So yeah, it was going to be 3 months, and it turned into getting married, and another 20 years later, and and a lot of, I'd worked at camp as a camp counselor kind of role, and so then to go full time, and so there's a lot of learning what that ministry is and what camping is, and even some of the impact. And you find out a lot about youth ministry after you become a youth pastor, not before.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So why camp? Like, what drew you to give your life to camp?
Yeah, and I get not as many opportunities now, but still a few, to stand in front of our leaders and stuff, our camp leaders, and talk to them. And so there's that passage where, things are getting tough for the larger group of disciples, and Jesus turns to the 12 and he kind of says, well, what about you guys? Are you going to leave me too? And the response is, where else would we go? This is where, you have the words of life. Where else are we going to go? And that's really how I feel about camp. I was like, well, where else would I go? This is where we see so much change happen for kids. This is like the best, in my opinion, it's the best like evangelistic leadership incubator discipleship tool that there is, and I love it, obviously. But why on earth would I go somewhere else? And that was definitely a part of moving back here. Was my information was 20 years old, and at the time that I left, the only camps that I knew in Australia were camps where people really served as missionaries. They didn't get paid. It was a very volunteer kind of place. Now, there were those camps in the States as well. We never felt that God had one of those for us. Part of that was not knowing anybody else in the country except for people who did the same camp job that we did. And so they're not a great supporter base, probably. Now, and so that's all I knew. And so part of moving back here was this wrestling with, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to still be in camp? I'm not going to go back to teaching. That's been like 20 years ago, and I really wasn't that good at it when I did it way back then. And so even to see God orchestrate that, to discover that there is actually a pretty big camping industry, if you like, and that there are larger organizations, or at least organizations that do actually pay staff, and you can have a life in camping. So that was actually a fantastic part of that journey, to come back, to be able to hang on to the thing that I love doing and investing my life in, and be able to continue to do that. It was a huge, huge blessing, because it was definitely one of those areas where we knew it was time to leave Cranhill, leave where we were, and it literally was that was it. That was all we knew. It was time to go. And so at that time, we had a window there where we were praying about it, and really thought we were supposed to come back to Australia. And there's a whole lot of reasons why that was good. And so I remember praying that, God, I'd love to be, I would be okay being either homeless or unemployed, but please not both. Like if I'm going to move back to Australia, I'd like to have either a job or a house. Like, but then we got both. So God is more than faithful. Yeah.
That's awesome. So when we talk about camping ministry, and you touched on it there, but like, I want to talk about why camp? Why is camp important? Why should parents send their kids to camp? Why should churches be involved in having camp be a part of their ministry?
Yeah, and I've had well, you know, the whole coming back out of COVID, lots of conversations with lots of churches, and you know, aspects there around why camp would be such a powerful thing in the life of their congregations, just to reconnect people. Um, Definitely the aspect of you know, the classic summer camp being huge. Lots of conversations there. It's been a lot of that recently, and then you know, you reaching out for this. We've got one of our guys who did his masters, and his whole premise was on faith formation in the context of camp. And even, you know, historically, I would have said that you get together with any church and kind of go, you know, hands up if you came to faith outside of a church, either at a camp or a retreat or a, you know, a youth weekend or something. And it's huge, huge numbers of people.
Yeah,
Um, and it's not that, you know, oh well, you know, the church is not doing nothing and it all happens at camp. It's like I'd look at it as, and in my story, I didn't grow up in church, but I had this friend who was sharing with me for like 9 months, all throughout the school year, and then I went to camp, which is where it just all kind of congealed together and made sense. And so it's definitely a partnership with lots of different groups. And so whether we're talking about uh, a congregation that, you know, maybe is a bit more disconnected because of online stuff and all those things through COVID, and it's a great incubator of relationships to come back together again, or um, a kid or a young person who's wrestling with identity and who am I and who is God. I think a huge part of it is we get to step away from all that every day, because we just don't do that a lot. You know, you run from school to basketball to homework to bed, and you just kind of rinse and repeat. And yeah, I rush off to a youth group on Wednesday night and I come back, and then I'm church on Sunday. And so some of it's just the idea, not that we stop. I mean, summer camp was games and fun and running around and busy, but there's that break from the everyday routine. And I think some of that, I don't know, shakes the
yeah,
dust off of some thoughts that get to rise to at the top. God gets a bit more of our attention from, especially in a lot of camps. It's, you know, very programmed every day, but we have, you know, intentional conversations. I think there's elements in the summer camp setting where there's all the things that your youth pastor tells you and your parents tell you, but suddenly this 18-year-old, 19-year-old cool kid says the same thing. And it's like, oh, okay,
yeah,
maybe my parents aren't as stupid as I thought, or maybe this is, you know, there's more to this than I thought. And so for me, it's I talk about community, but I think also some of the faith formation, when you think about it, community is built through shared experience, um, but not only shared experience. Otherwise, everybody at a football game would be best buds because they all had the same experience. Um, Shared suffering, and so some of that. You know, I'm in a room full of 12 people, or I can't pick what I want for lunch. Like some of that stuff is just suffering at camp. Might just be I just don't have my phone and my Xbox and my everything every day. I've just got to go and do other stuff. But often that, you know, that kind of
right,
fast forwards community. So, and especially when you throw in the summers that the staff that I worked with, when you throw in some kind of adversity, which could be just the fact that I've got to work with 7-year-olds for the fourth week in a row. You know, who am I relying on now? I'm tapped out of my own strength. Or, you know, there were definitely those years where
yeah,
hard stuff happens. People get fired, grandmas die, you know, lots of bad things, hard things that you walk through together. And not that that doesn't happen elsewhere, but you're just doing it 24/7. It's all day together. I can't go away and put on
yeah,
my I'm a good Christian, look at me, I'm all perfect face and come back and I can maintain that for 2 hours at church or for an event and I can go home again and you're just there. And so it kind of strips away all of the um not all of, but you know, it makes it a lot harder to pretend because we're, you know, we see Hunter when
yeah,
he's having fun, and we see Hunter and Malcolm when they're stressed out and tired and hot and sweaty, and you're kind of like, all right, I'm going to squeeze you now. What's gonna come out? Is it more Malcolm, or is it, it's a bit of Jesus going to ooze out when I squish you now? Uh, and the other reason that I think that
Right.
um, there's an element where often we get really formulaic. Like, if I do these things, then this is how to have a great discipleship program, or have a great, I don't know, evangelistic program or something. And sometimes I just think we just need to kind of set the table and get out of the way and let God show up. Like, uh, I used to talk about, if I ever wrote a book, which I'm not going to do because I don't know that I ever would, but if I wrote like a biography, a memoir, it'd be like, life, death, and dodgeball. Like, would be the kind of a great, we just play games. What do we do at camp? We play games, waiting until God shows up. And even though I'm confident that He will, I
Yeah.
don't want to be like, well, I need to do these three things in this order, and then, 1, 2, 3, now it's God. Um, but yet at the same time,
Yeah.
I know that if I bring a group of kids together, give them a bunch of fun where they can just relax, be themselves, not worry about, what kind of shoes I'm wearing or how cool my hair looks, that He will show up. And so I often find that a really strange tension
Yeah.
between, in fact, I've been convicted that sometimes I'm not surprised when He shows up. And I'm kind of like, well, you can't lose that. That's really bad. Like, oh yeah, of course, God showed up. We're here at camp and we did these things, and pow, look at that. There's a big powerful moment. And you're like, well, I
Right.
need to still see the divine in that, like the power of what God's doing, and not just kind of become like, oh yeah, here's God. But it is, it is
Yeah.
it's the time away from routine, and it's the intentionality to, ask those kind of bigger questions and give kids a bit of space to wrestle with them. Uh, and it's the ongoing nature of it. Like, a weekend's not long enough. You need a bit longer. 2 nights, and you're just getting to
Yeah.
the. I can let down all my pretending, or posturing, whether it's a 10-year-old level or a 50-year-old level. I'm not long pretending anymore, and so that time away just is valuable. And when you look, it's not the same thing, but you look at, that we always talk about how important it is to get away daily. You look at, Jesus getting off by Himself in the midst of ministry. Um, but some of that extended stuff, uh, we're often afraid, not afraid, yeah, afraid, that's a good word, um, to just be alone with our own thoughts and a bit of quiet and actually listen to what God says, uh, which makes it sound like camp is like a monastic retreat, which it's not. But there's those elements of my schedule isn't driving me, my music isn't driving me, my parents aren't driving the conversation. I can just I can engage in
Right.
with whatever God's got for me at the time. And that's why I think, so I see the same thing on mission trips. It's some extended time away. Yeah. And I think when you talk about
Yeah.
um, just
I
looking at,
love.
hey, where do I see God's faithfulness, or where do I see God showing up? Um, what's even what you said at the start there, where we want to um, you want to record some stories. The fact that we don't do that as a culture, I was thinking about, we're talking with some leaders about when it was an oral culture and they had all those stories all throughout the Old Testament. God talks about remember, remember, remember when this happened, remember when that happened, and they had to talk about them to pass them on. Uh, and now we have everything written down, 77 versions of the Bible. We can Google whatever we want, uh, and even in I can record, I can diary, I can blog about my own prayer journal, whatever it is. But sometimes I think with moving away from that, we don't actually look back a whole lot and kind of go, here's where God's faithfulness showed up, or here's where He did this thing. it might be in my prayer journal, which is good for me, and I can go back and see, hey, here's what I prayed about, and here's where God answered it. But sometimes the community aspect of that, I think was different when you had to tell those stories because it was the only way to pass them on. And it would have been the grand ones of crossing the Red Sea, but it would have also
Right.
been Grandma Bertha and her story of whatever it was, praying for something. And so I think there's some of that as we get
Hmm.
lots of information, not much knowledge. One of those kind of deals.
Yeah. So, like, talking about stories and seeing God's faithfulness as you look back, I mean, we'll just use a big moving back to Australia after 20 years in the States. As you reflect on that, what are some of okay, that was definitely God being faithful in that
Yeah,
moment.
so I visited. Yeah, and definitely there's a big arc there of even the last 6 years. Knew it was time to leave Cran Hill, and one of the questions that you probably get, maybe not yet because you're still young. Um, when I was a program director in camp, you'd often get the question as I got older, when are you going to grow up and become a real camp director? Like, move from youth pastor to real pastor, which is a great phrase anyway, real pastor. But,
Yeah.
and one of the things that
Oh yeah.
that was never
Oh yeah.
attractive to me about that role at pretty much every camp I saw in the States was the fundraising aspect of it. Now, whether that's, lack of faith on my part or not, or what I perceive as my personality and giftings, that was just not, it was such a huge part of the job, but it was not something that I was ever drawn to. Um, and so it was like, oh no, I'm not going there. I'm staying here. Uh, so then we decide that it's time to leave, and we're wrestling with, will I be in camping, like I said, or do something else? What would it be? And so at the end of October, we decided we were moving back to Australia and, prayed about, please not homeless and unemployed, see how that works. And so we look back now at packing up 20 years of life, moving to the other side of the world, uh, finding a job, um, in camping, finding a place to live. And I don't know what you think what that should take, but it all happened in a month. Uh, Now, a year and a half ago, I moved 2 hours from the edge of the city to the island that I live on now. And that took forever to find a place to move to, like just to find a place to rent. It was crazy. It just took forever. And so we look back now, we kind of go, we went from, we know we need to move back to Australia, but that's all we know, to I got reconnected with a guy that I used to lead as a volunteer on camp with, and got to have really good conversations with him about what does camping look like in Australia? Are there real jobs? Um, got connected with a camp that he was also associated with, but he did a really good job of not telling me that at the time. Um, to interview from the other side of the world, we were with Laurie's family at Thanksgiving afternoon, and I'm hiding in the back bedroom trying to do a Skype interview. And then and they all knew what I was doing because we told them we were leaving. And so there's her extended family that you walk out of that interview back into the living room. They're like, so how'd it go? What do you think? Did you get the job? And I'm just like, bit of peace and quiet. Um,
Yeah.
so by the end of November, we had a job offer. And at that particular place, it came with a house on site as well. And so which is unusual in the context over here. Pretty normal in the States, but unusual here. And so to go, hey, in the span of a month, um, God not only took care of hey, we're going to not be homeless or unemployed, but enabled me to be able to stay in this ministry, this industry that I love, um, and then we could just focus on the craziness of trying to sell all that stuff and move. And so we landed on New Year's
Yeah.
Eve. We went to bed by about 8 o'clock because we were just wrecked, and jumped back into because that's January, which is summertime here. My first week on the job at this new campsite on the other side of the world was summer camp was going on all around me. So I was ridiculously familiar. Um, Very similar, structures, and we got cabin groups and we got Bible studies and speakers, and it's very similar stuff. And so I was really familiar. Now there are some other differences with camping over here that are frankly fantastic, but that was a great way to start. That's very familiar. And then we had so we had 5 years there that was fantastic, and I'd made the jump from program director to camp director. Like I was now the guy in charge. No fundraising, so that was even just another part there that God could give me this move, if you like, whether it's up the organizational tree or whatever, without this thing that I just really didn't feel was part of my gifting. But fundraising's not a part of this role at all.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to send me some, I'll send you a thank you, but it's not something that I need to do. And so even that. So then talking with my boss, and just having some great conversations, just learning a lot from him. He's been with this company, this organization, for 22 years or something, and just seen a lot of history, and just having some great chats with a guy who's about 15 years older than I am, and just a really good friendship. And obviously, the hardest part for us about leaving the States was a great church we were connected with, a great life group, great friends. And so to kind of also have that in a boss was great, because there is that camp's a bit different. Well, a bit, hopefully church is the same way, that, you've got an organizational structure and a boss to report to and hit goals and all those kind of things, but it's also a ministry that you're doing together, and there's commonality around vision and purpose and things. And so it was great to be able to have that friendship, which I had with Scott in the States, and to be able to have that again with Mark here was fantastic. And then even just to see him affirming gifts in me, not knowing that he was planning on retiring, and then later encouraging me to apply for that role, and able to have some really honest conversations about what the role looks like, and it's not what it is and what it isn't, and help confirm the calling that that I didn't think I had. I was perfectly okay with not applying for this role, and another guy that works with us, internal applicant, if you like, I was excited about him applying, and we chatted about could we survive the change of working alongside to him being the boss, and I was actually excited about that. And then I think he'd actually had an interview, and then he decided it wasn't for him, and all of a sudden I just got this, oh no, I'm supposed to have applied. I'm supposed to have done that. Oh no. And it was I was right up, and as soon as he was out, I was like, oh, it can't be somebody else.
Yeah.
And so then this process of even just going to the board and saying, look, I know this is late, but would you consider it? And here's the journey. And then coming out the other side and being offered this role, and even the connection with the guys who were my peers, who now I'm their boss, and has been fantastic. And then, you stand back and you kind of look back over the last, that 6-year period, and you're like, well, God's got his hands all over it. And definitely there was a lot of peace about moving to Australia, even though we had no idea what we were doing, where we were going. We knew that was right. And we'd looked at everything from moving back to Ohio near her parents to moving to Arizona because it was a place to go. I don't know. And so there's a lot of peace about moving to Australia. And then even just stepping into that role, and then the process throughout those next bunch of years. And there was hard stuff in there. Laurie lost her mum while we were living over here, and so she had to fly back for both illness and then for a funeral. And so even in some of those times, God provided for us through the job, which, well, I mean, money's not the reason to have a job, but it helps you with other things. And so one of the aspects was I was earning enough that she could actually fly back and forth quite a few times while her mum was sick. and when she passed away and spent some time there that we just wouldn't have been able to afford on our role before. And so there's just some real practical things too that sometimes I think, well, not sometimes, God's always in the big stuff, but I think he's also in, the little stuff. And now to be in a position where people come to us and they, as a camping organization, we're kind of now the guys that people go, oh, what are you guys doing? How are you doing this? We should do that. And so it's kind of gone from, which is a really humbling spot to be in, because I don't even know half the names of the guys who helped build this organization, build these camps back in the day. There's photos on the wall and stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's some old guy and that's some old guy. And yet they built this great camping organization, and now I get to kind of carry it on. But even that is, I love talking about what we do. And sometimes I love being super practical, like, oh, if you do that in the afternoon and do that in the morning, then this will be better. Like, it's still pretty practical sometimes. And to be able to have that conversation with other camps now is just a lot of fun. A lot more fun than I thought it was going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Over the last, I've been gone from Grand Hill 5-6 years now. The number of conversations I've had with people, whether it be former staff or campers or whatever, that look to you as I need you to know you're a living legend. Like, I don't know if you're old enough for that yet, but you are.
15 years.
How long were you at Grand Hill?
Yeah. Almost to the day. Like we got there in January and we left in January.
I was just talking to somebody.
January. I will. The living legend. The living legend.
I was, like I said, I was directly in.
There was a. I think there's. That just reminded me. There's God's faithfulness in. It's not even hard stuff. Like, there's definitely humility in. I knew that I'd been there for 15 years. Now, like I said, we decided at the end of October to move. The end of November, we had a job, and the end of December, we moved. So it was very quick. But I definitely had a period of having to wrestle with, I'm pretty sure at that point, I was something like the second or the third longest serving staff member at Cran Hill had ever had, including all their directors and all those kind of things. Like, there was the guys who carved it out of the bush that were all volunteers and did a ton of work. But then they had a director for 20 years, and the Scott before the Scott that I worked for was there for about 20 years, I think. And I'm kind of like, well, so there was definitely a little bit of like, didn't even make the newsletter. Thanks, Mel, you're out of here after 20 years. Or, like, there was a little bit of like, well, yeah, that was, thanks for recognizing that. A bit of, I don't know if bitterness is the right word, but a bit of, anger at the time, or a bit of, oh, that really feels like a bit of a kick in the guts. Now, I compressed that timeline, so I really didn't give anybody an opportunity to, do anything or pull anything or, do a farewell or any of that kind of stuff. We definitely did that with the staff that were there.
Have that farewell tour, right?
But it was one of those where then I had to remember, look, I'm there doing what God wanted me to do, and I'm still doing what he wanted me to do. And so, deal with your upsettedness. And the guy before me, the first guy that I worked for there, both called Scott, he said, in ministry's a bucket of water, and you stick your hand in it, and when you pull your hand out, that's the hole that you leave behind, is the same kind of hole that you'd leave if you pulled your hand out of a bucket of water, which is no hole at all. And you're like, oh. But then I reflect on that, and I was like, well, what do you want? Do you want the whole place to fall apart because you're not there? Like, somehow it was all built around you, and you're kind of like, well, no, actually, you want the ministry to keep going. You want people to be still doing stuff. And, if it was like a speed bump and nobody noticed, that's actually, I was like, all right, okay. I'll try to rest in that and be a bit more happy.
Yeah. Yeah, that was such a fun, it was really, I struggled with you had like big shoes. I had big shoes to fill. But I had, going into that, because of that conversation we had with the why are you in camping ministry? Well, maybe camping ministry isn't for you, and some conversations along the way, known that it was just a season for me. I knew that the end goal was youth ministry, but was incredibly thankful that you had taught me what you taught. So God taught you what you knew, and then you poured into me, and then I was able to function as that bridge guy getting to the next guy. And God was just incredibly faithful to say, yeah, you're not going to be here forever, but while you're here, be faithful in the moment. So I couldn't have done that without you. So I have conversations with people from that world all the time about the different things I learned, whether it was the what was it? The 3 P's of community with staff training: you pay together, pray together, play together, or little things like that.
And which I totally stole from
that are
somebody else.
pillars
Like
of the youth ministry here at the
wasn't
church.
an original thought. Yeah.
I mean, there's not. Right. Well, the big one is the biggest. What did Malcolm teach you? It was smart people can come up with something.
Yeah.
Wise people
it's
can steal it from
There's
someone
nothing
else.
new under the sun. So if somebody's done what you want to do, just go find it. Yeah. I used to talk about that as I was highly motivated by laziness, which I thought is not actually
so I just wanted
true.
to.
I just want to find a really good way that you can do something that lets me go and do the thing that I really want to do.
Right. No, that's awesome. So on behalf of all those people and myself, I just want to give you your flowers. Thank you for being faithful in those moments. And there's so many stories we could tell. We'll do that some other time because we had a lot of good times. But I don't want to keep you too long because you got a whole day ahead of you, and I'm going to bed. So thanks for being here.
You're
thanks
welcome.
for giving me the some of your time. So all right, and that has been In Real Time.